What if the greatest British war films ever made were hiding in plain sight right now, free to watch tonight? These are not just old reels of glory and medals, they are stories of fear, courage, and sacrifice that once made censors tremble and veterans weep. Forgotten by Hollywood, rediscovered by streaming hunters, these films reveal the truth Britain once tried to forget. Let's uncover 15 British war classics you can watch free tonight. Number 15. The Way Ahead, 1944. Before it was propaganda, it was prophecy. The Way Ahead was one of the first wartime films to show ordinary men becoming soldiers, not heroes. Directed by Carol Reed and written by Eric Ambler, it followed a group of civilians drafted into the British Army as they trained, stumbled, and finally found their courage in North Africa. It was made while the real war still raged, which gave it an eerie authenticity. The film dared to be honest. Instead of romanticizing the army, it revealed confusion, exhaustion, and even cowardice. Some British officers hated it, fearing it showed too much weakness. Others embraced it as a morale booster for a weary public. David Niven's calm leadership made it human, while Trevor Howard's early role hinted at greatness to come. Behind the scenes, the War Office clashed with Reed over scenes showing soldiers questioning orders. They wanted a recruitment film. Reed wanted a human story. He won. The movie was nearly banned from American cinemas for being too bleak, but audiences embraced it for its grit and realism. Decades later, veterans called it the most truthful film about British training life. Its small victories and failures mirrored their own memories. The Way Ahead is still free to watch online today, a window into the soul of wartime Britain, stripped of glory but full of heart. Number 14. Ice Cold in Alex, 1958. Ice Cold in Alex was never about beer. It was about survival. Set during the North African campaign, it told the story of a small British medical convoy lost in the desert, hunted by the heat and haunted by suspicion. John Mills played the weary Captain Anson, whose dream of an ice-cold lager in Alexandria became a symbol of endurance. What looked like a simple survival story became a tense psychological drama. When a mysterious South African officer joins them, the group begins to unravel. The film captured paranoia long before the Cold War thrillers did. Its scenes of heat exhaustion and mechanical breakdowns were filmed in real desert conditions. The actors collapsed for real. Censors demanded cuts when the story hinted that the mysterious officer might be a German spy traveling with the British. The Ministry of Defense hated the implication that British soldiers could be fooled so easily. But the director J. Lee Thompson refused to change it. He believed the war was built on uncertainty, not pride. The ending, where Mills finally drinks that famous beer, became one of British cinema's most iconic moments. Audiences cheered in theaters across the world. Yet what lingered was not victory, but weariness. Ice Cold in Alex became required viewing for military cadets studying leadership under pressure. Today, it remains free to stream on several platforms, a reminder that true heroism often tastes of sweat dust and doubt not medals. Number 13. Went the Day Well, 1942. Few films ever dared to ask what if the enemy invaded before the war was even won. Went the Day Well shocked wartime audiences by showing an English village infiltrated by disguised German soldiers who gradually reveal their plan to take over. Released in the middle of World War II, it was both a warning and a nightmare. The movie mixed cozy British manners with sudden violence. Women and children became fighters. Trust turned to terror. Critics called it one of the most subversive wartime films ever made. It was directed by Alberto Cavalcanti, a Brazilian immigrant working for Ealing Studios who dared to expose how fragile English calm could be. The government nearly stopped its release, fearing it would cause panic among rural communities. Rumors spread that Churchill himself objected, but propaganda ministers eventually approved it, believing its message of vigilance was vital. Behind the camera, the cast trained with real Home Guard instructors. Some of them would later fight in the war for real. When the film finally premiered, audiences sat in stunned silence. This was not escapism. It was a vision of invasion from within. Later critics hailed it as the first British thriller to blend realism with horror. Today Went the Day Well survives as a cult classic streaming freely for anyone curious about how Britain turned fear into art. Its legacy lies not in glory, but in its chilling honesty that even the safest village can become a battlefield overnight. Number 12. The Cruel Sea. 1953. The Cruel Sea was not about battle. It was about loneliness. The film followed British sailors aboard a corvette battling German U-boats in the Atlantic. Jack Hawkins gave one of his greatest performances as Captain Erickson, a man haunted by duty and despair. The sea was the enemy. The submarines were only shadows. Released just 8 years after the war ended, it stunned audiences with its emotional weight. No glamour, no romance, just waves, oil, and men breaking apart under the strain. Critics called it the most authentic naval film ever made. But what shocked them was its darkness. The film included a moment where Erickson orders depth charges dropped, knowing they will kill friendly sailors in the water. The censors tried to cut it. Director Charles Friend refused. He said it was the truth. Behind-the-camera crews battled real storms, filming in freezing waters around Plymouth. The ship used in the film was an actual wartime vessel that had seen combat. The actors became seasick. The sound of real waves and engines added terrifying realism. Veterans wept in silence. During its screenings, many called it the only film that understood what it meant to serve at sea, where every night could be your last. The Cruel Sea became a defining moment in post-war British cinema and remains free to watch today. It stands as proof that sometimes courage means simply surviving another dawn. Number 11. The Hill. 1965. The Hill was a prison film, but the prisoners were British soldiers. Directed by Sidney Lumet and set in a British military stockade in North Africa, it told the story of men punished by their own army for breaking discipline. Sean Connery, fresh off James Bond, took the role of a rebellious soldier facing sadistic guards and brutal heat. When it premiered, it shocked audiences expecting another heroic war picture. Instead, they got sweat cruelty and psychological warfare. The titular hill was a man-made mound of sand that prisoners were forced to climb endlessly under the desert sun. The scenes were so real that actors fainted during filming. The British Army hated it. Officials claimed it portrayed military discipline as barbaric. The War Office refused to cooperate or lend equipment. Lumet filmed anyway in a real Spanish penal colony. Rumors spread that Connery chose the role to destroy his Bond image and prove he could act. He did. Critics hailed his performance as his best. The film was banned in several military bases for its anti-authoritarian message, yet it became a cult classic among veterans who saw in it the hidden truth of Army life, the hierarchy, the cruelty, and the loneliness. Today, The Hill stands as one of the most intense portrayals of military control ever made. It is freely available on several streaming platforms. Watch it and you will understand why soldiers called it the film that dared to speak their pain aloud. Number 10. Tunes of Glory. 1960. Tunes of Glory was not about the sound of bagpipes. It was about pride and power. Set in a Scottish Highland regiment after World War II, it starred Alec Guinness as the rough, charismatic Major Jock Sinclair and John Mills as the stiff colonel who replaces him. What begins as a clash of styles turns into psychological warfare. Audiences expected a war drama. What they got was a study in command madness and class. Guinness delivered one of his most complex performances, showing how military glory corrodes the soul. Mills matched him note for note until their conflict turned deadly. The film angered Army officials for exposing the arrogance of officers and the snobbery that divided ranks. Critics praised it as daring and tragic. The Ministry of Defense requested script changes, removing scenes where officers drink themselves into breakdown. The producers ignored them. Behind the scenes, Guinness and Mills rehearsed endlessly, perfecting the emotional explosions that would define the film. Their final confrontation left the crew in stunned silence. Tunes of Glory won awards, but was quietly shelved in many barracks. Cinemas. Commanders feared its message of fractured leadership would demoralize troops. Decades later, historians hailed it as one of the most psychologically accurate portraits of post-war command. You can watch it free today. It is not a film about victory. It is about what happens to men who cannot live without the war that made them. Number 9. The Dam Busters, 1955. The Dam Busters was the film that made the world believe in miracles of engineering and courage. Based on the true story of Operation Chastise, it followed British pilots using the revolutionary bouncing bomb to destroy German dams in 1943. It was a box office triumph and became the blueprint for every aviation movie that followed. Audiences cheered the bravery of the pilots led by Richard Todd as Wing Commander Guy Gibson. Yet behind the patriotic surface lay tension. The Ministry of Defense insisted on strict control over the script. Every technical detail had to be vetted. Even the shape of the bouncing bomb remained classified when filming began. Director Michael Anderson recreated the mission with chilling realism. Real Lancaster bombers were flown again over British reservoirs. Pilots who had fought in the war acted as advisors. The actors were terrified during low-level flying sequences that brushed treetops. Controversy arrived decades later when critics revisited the film's portrayal of war as clean and heroic. Veterans, however, defended it fiercely, saying it captured the camaraderie and fear of precision raids better than any other film. The Dam Busters theme music became a national anthem of sorts, played at military ceremonies and sports events. Today, the film streams freely online, restored in high definition. Watch it, and you will feel the impossible blend of science, hope, and sacrifice that defined Britain's finest hour. Number 8. The Bridge on the River Kwai, 1957. It was the British war epic that conquered the world. The Bridge on the River Kwai told of Allied prisoners forced by the Japanese to build a bridge in Burma. Alec Guinness, as Colonel Nicholson, turned pride into madness, believing he must complete the bridge as a monument to discipline. It won 7 Oscars and defined post-war British cinema, but beneath its triumph lay a storm of controversy. Real veterans of the Burma Railway condemned it for romanticizing their suffering. They said no British officer would collaborate so willingly. Some called it betrayal. The Japanese government also protested its portrayal of brutality. Behind the camera, chaos reigned. Director David Lean fought heat disease and collapsing bridges during filming in Ceylon. The bamboo bridge had to be rebuilt after a monsoon destroyed it. The famous explosion was shot with multiple cameras and could only be done once. Guinness nearly quit after clashing with Lean over Nicholson's descent into obsession. Lean wanted tragedy. Guinness wanted dignity. Their argument became legendary and nearly ended their friendship. Yet the result became immortal. The final whistle tune symbolized the irony of war, men dying for meaningless symbols. Today, it is freely available to watch online, restored to its original grandeur. The Bridge on the River Kwai remains a haunting question disguised as a war story. What is duty when it destroys your soul? Number 7. A Bridge Too Far, 1977. A Bridge Too Far was not just a war film, it was an apology. Richard Attenborough's massive epic told the doomed story of Operation Market Garden, the Allied attempt to capture bridges across the Netherlands in 1944. Despite its all-star cast, Sean Connery, Anthony Hopkins, Michael Caine, and Robert Redford, the film refused to glorify anything. It showed failure, chaos, miscommunication, generals who gambled lives for headlines. Critics at the time were divided. Some called it too long, too brutal, too honest. Others praised it for finally showing the price of overconfidence. Veterans of the operation thanked Attenborough for telling the truth. Behind the scenes, the production was enormous. Thousands of extras and real paratroopers were used. The Dutch government allowed the crew to film in the original battle locations. Tanks, bridges, and entire towns were rebuilt only to be blown apart for realism. Financially, it nearly sank United Artists. The film cost millions and struggled in the American market where audiences preferred victory to tragedy. But in Britain, it became a memorial to lost soldiers. Today, A Bridge Too Far is free to watch on several classic film platforms. It stands as a towering reminder that courage means little without wisdom. The bridge was too far, but the truth finally reached home. Number 6. The Longest Day, 1962. The Longest Day was not just a movie, it was a reenactment on a grand scale. Made less than 2 decades after D-Day, it gathered a global cast of stars, John Wayne, Richard Burton, Kenneth More, Sean Connery, to recreate the invasion of Normandy in almost documentary fashion. It was massive, authentic, and exhausting to make. Shot entirely in black and white, it blurred the line between cinema and memory. Soldiers who had fought on those same beaches acted as extras. Paratroopers who jumped that night guided the scenes. The film used multiple directors to cover every perspective: British, American, French, and German. It was the first attempt to show war as a mosaic of chaos, not a single heroic story. Behind the scenes, politics raged. The Pentagon and the British War Office demanded script approval to protect military reputations. Scenes showing Allied confusion and friendly fire were nearly deleted. Producer Darryl F. Zanuck fought to keep them. He won barely. The shoot nearly collapsed when rough seas destroyed beach sets in Normandy. French officials briefly shut production down after local protests, but when it premiered, veterans wept. Critics said it felt like reliving history. Some called it cold and mechanical. Others said it was the closest thing to witnessing D-Day without being there. Today, The Longest Day can be watched free across several streaming archives. Its stark realism still humbles modern filmmakers. It remains the film that turned memory into living celluloid. Number 5. The Guns of Navarone, 1961. The Guns of Navarone exploded onto screens as a thrilling adventure. But beneath the excitement lay a darker reflection of Britain's fading empire. Based on Alistair MacLean's novel, it followed a small Allied team sent to destroy massive German guns guarding the Aegean Sea. Gregory Peck, David Niven, and Anthony Quinn gave legendary performances in a story about courage, betrayal, and endurance. Audiences loved it. Critics praised its tension and realism, yet the production was cursed with chaos. Filmed in Rhodes, Greece, it faced storms, strikes, and injuries. David Niven nearly died of a blood infection. He returned months later to finish scenes against doctor's orders. Director J. Lee Thompson worked under extreme conditions, creating explosions that destroyed real cliffs. The British press accused it of turning war into spectacle, but veterans saw something else. They saw the exhaustion of impossible missions. The Ministry of Defense reportedly refused to endorse it, claiming it glorified insubordination and risked showing command breakdowns. Despite censorship worries, it became one of the highest-grossing British films of the decade. Its score and visuals influenced an entire generation of filmmakers, from Ridley Scott to Christopher Nolan. Today, The Guns of Navarone remains free to stream, a timeless reminder that even the greatest missions are built on the edge of despair. The guns may fall silent, but the echo of sacrifice never does. Number 4. The Desert Rats, 1953. The Desert Rats was the forgotten sibling of the Desert Fox. It followed British and Australian troops defending Tobruk against Rommel's Afrika Korps. Richard Burton played Captain McRoberts, a teacher-turned-reluctant hero leading exhausted men through endless sandstorms and despair. At its release, it divided audiences. Some saw it as patriotic. Others saw it as painfully realistic. Hollywood backed the production, but British officials were wary. The government worried it gave too much sympathy to Rommel and too little to British leadership. Behind the scenes, Burton clashed with director Robert Wise over tone. He wanted grit. Wise wanted spectacle. Their arguments made the performances crackle with energy. The heat of the Arizona desert where it was filmed matched the fury of their exchanges. Censors objected to scenes of starving soldiers stealing rations and disobeying orders. They said it made the British Army look weak. But the studio refused to change a frame. Critics later said that honesty made it immortal. Though overshadowed by larger epics, The Desert Rats became a cult favorite among veterans who called it the only film that captured the fatigue of desert warfare. Now streaming freely on multiple sites, it stands as a haunting portrait of endurance against both the enemy and one's own limits. It reminds us that bravery often comes from men who simply refuse to collapse. Number 3. The Colditz Story, 1955. The Colditz Story was not just another escape film, it was a testimony written by those who survived the impossible. Based on real events inside Germany's infamous Colditz Castle, the film followed Allied prisoners who devoted their captivity to plotting one of the most daring escapes of the war. Starring John Mills and Eric Portman, it captured the claustrophobic terror of confinement and the razor's edge between discipline and madness. At first glance, it seemed like patriotic adventure. But the truth underneath was darker. Many of the escapees had died trying. Their ingenuity was matched only by their despair. The British government hesitated to approve filming inside the real castle. They feared reopening wounds of war. But director Guy Hamilton himself, a wartime Navy officer, insisted on authenticity. Crews shot on location among crumbling walls still marked by bullet scars. Former POWs visited the set and broke down seeing their prison again. Critics praised its realism and restraint. There was no glamour, no fantasy. The escape sequences were slow, meticulous, and full of dread. It felt like documentary, not cinema. Behind the scenes, Hamilton battled studio pressure to make it more thrilling. He refused. He wanted truth, not spectacle. That decision cost him funding and nearly the film's release, yet when it opened, veterans filled cinemas in silence. They said it finally captured what courage under captivity truly meant. Today, the Colditz Story streams freely across several archives. It remains a cornerstone of British wartime realism where courage whispered instead of shouted. Number 2. In Which We Serve, 1942. In Which We Serve was made while the war still raged. Co-directed by Noel Coward and David Lean, it became Britain's first cinematic rallying cry. The story followed the crew of HMS Torrin as their destroyer sank under German attack and their memories floated to the surface. Coward wrote, starred, and scored the film. He played the captain with stoic dignity, showing a nation that endurance was its greatest weapon. Each flashback revealed not just battle, but family sacrifice and unity at home. It was part film, part prayer. Behind the cameras, the Ministry of Information watched every scene. They wanted propaganda. Coward wanted truth. The struggle was constant. When censors objected to scenes of fear and failure, Coward fought back, saying honesty inspired courage more than slogans. Filming during wartime was chaos. Real naval crews participated. Bombs fell near studios during production. David Lean learned his craft cutting and shooting scenes under blackout conditions. The finished film premiered to stunned audiences. Critics said it was not just cinema, it was national therapy. Some officers complained it was too sentimental. Others called it sacred. Churchill reportedly screened it privately more than once. Today it remains freely available online, preserved as one of Britain's greatest wartime achievements. In Which We Serve endures because it reminds us that heroism often begins in silence and ends in loss. Number 1. The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp, 1943. The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp was the film Britain almost banned itself from seeing. Made in the middle of the war by Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger, it dared to question the very idea of British honor. It followed a soldier, Clive Candy, through 3 wars as he aged, clinging to old notions of chivalry while the world turned brutal around him. Audiences expected patriotism. What they got was heartbreak. The government hated it. Churchill personally tried to stop its release, claiming it undermined morale. He was furious that it portrayed a German officer sympathetically and mocked old military values. Behind the scenes, Deborah Kerr played 3 versions of the same woman, symbolizing lost ideals. Roger Livesey as Blimp gave one of cinema's greatest performances, capturing both arrogance and innocence. The film's visuals were bold Technicolor glory in a gray world. Powell and Pressburger refused to compromise. They smuggled prints to America when the British censors delayed approval. Critics abroad hailed it as genius while British officials fumed. Only years later did it return home recognized as a masterpiece. Today, The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp can be watched free on major archives, fully restored. Its message still cuts deep. Traditions fade, empires fall, but the heart that questions itself survives. It is not just a film, it is Britain's conscience captured on film stock. These 15 British war classics are not relics. They are reflections of courage, guilt, and memory preserved in celluloid. Each one tells a truth others tried to silence. Which one will you watch tonight? Which story of honor and fear still speaks to you? Like, share, and subscribe to keep these forgotten legends alive for another generation.